you guys are doing well. So today I wanted to bring you this video. So I'll be showing you how to use Apollo server with Prisma, and we'll be building out this application here. So let me demonstrate it to you. I could add new novels. Say, take the link of this. I paste it here. I call it Harry Potter. I add a novel and it should pop up here. Okay, I can also read more about the novel. I could add an author, J.K. Rowling's. I can add an author, should come up here, and I can delete an author. I could also change the title of the novel and also the image URL. So I'll go here, copy image link. I say, let's call it Potter, and I paste the link here. I update it and it should update here. Okay, if I go back, oops. If I go back, I could also delete it. Should go away, yeah. So this is what we'll be building today. Hope this will be useful to you guys. And everything here is the endpoints are created with the GraphQL server, and we're fetching those with GraphQL client. So here I've got an empty terminal. I'll cd into the directory where I want to initiate the next app. So cd yt, and here I'll create it, npx create next app at latest. So we'll name it GraphQL next. We want TypeScript, ESLint, no need the source directory, experimental, yes, enter. So this experimental app will initiate Next.js 13 for us. So this will install all the dependencies which is required. So that should be done now. So once that's done, I'll cd into that GraphQL next, and then open VS Code. So with that, I have it here. So just to test it whether everything's working, I'll run the server, pm run dev, and I'll head over to localhost 3000. So everything is working accordingly. So next, let us install Prisma. So npm I Prisma. This is for the CLI. So we'll install it as a development dependency. Hit enter. So once that's done, let's initiate it with npm init Prisma. I think it was npx init Prisma. Okay, I misspelled that. Prisma. npx Prisma init. Okay. So that creates a Prisma folder for us and this file. So now let's say what our tables looks like. So we'll have a novel table, we'll have an ID which is string, this will be at ID, and we'll be using UUID. So UUID, then why am I getting an error here? This line is not a valid field or attribute. ID string ID. Let me check that. We rewrite that. See again. String at ID. Okay. At default UUID. Fine. Next, we'll have a title. Should be a string. We'll also have an image, which should be a string, but it will be optional. And we'll have a created at, which will be a date time, and by default I want it to have the current time, so now, and updated at should also be a date time, and at updated. Okay, and finally we'll have an author. This will be a one-to-many relationship, so author will be array of author. So if I hit save now, it formats everything for me. That is because of this extension which I have. If I go here and search for Prisma, this is the one which I have installed, so that gives you all this, the coloring and the highlights, the formatting, all of that. Next we'll create our author table. So author, author, and we can actually copy this part and paste it here, and instead of name, instead of title, we'll have a name. It should be a string, and if I hit save again, it creates all this relation for me. That's a good thing which this Prisma extension provides me with. So now that that's done, we'll have to choose a database. So in our case, we are using PostgreSQL, and the database I'm using is Supabase. You could use whichever you're comfortable with. So if you're using Supabase, just head over to Supabase, sign up, and you will get a pop-up called create new project. Just click that and you'll be directed to this page. So once that's done, head over to settings, scroll down. You should go to the database, scroll down in the connection string, URI tab, copy this, paste it in the env table, the env file, paste it here, and make sure you give it the password which you entered earlier. So in my case, it is this right here, and I'll save that, close that, save this as well, and next I'll hit npx prisma db push. So this basically now creates these two tables in the database which you have selected. So here I should be getting a message anytime soon saying that it is connected. Your database is now in sync with Prisma schema. Okay, now to check that, let's go to Supabase, and if I go to table editor, I have my two tables which I mentioned here. I'll allow this. Okay, so once that's done, next let's install Apollo server and GraphQL. So in their documentation, Apollo server docs, if I go down to install dependencies, I get this line of code here. I'll copy that and I'll paste that here. So with that, we have our dependencies for Apollo server and GraphQL. So while this is installing, under pages directory API, we'll have to create a new file called GraphQL.ts. Actually, before that, we have another configuration to make for Prisma. So if you're using Next.js, you'll have to do this. So if I go to Google and just Google Next.js Prisma client Next.js, and if I go here, best practice for initiating Prisma client, yeah, here. So we'll have to create a new file called db.ts, and you'll have to copy this out and paste this. So this is basically because while using Next.js, each time we save, it refreshes the server. So if we did not use this file, I mean these codes, each time we refresh the server, a new Prisma client is generated. So we don't want that. We want only one Prisma client for throughout the application. That is why we put this here. In the documentation, they've mentioned this in detail. So let me close that as well. Now, okay, so once we've installed the Apollo server and the dependencies, we'll have to create a new file called GraphQL.ts, and inside here, while using Next.js 13, it's a bit different. So I found out this GitHub repo, Apollo server integration next. I'll link this down in the description below. So basically, we have to copy this and paste it here. We'll also have to install this. Okay, npm I and hit enter. And for Apollo server, 4, we don't use GQL anymore. So we say something as hash GraphQL. Okay, so with that, we've created a GraphQL server. Now let's test this. So npm run dev, and if I go to localhost 3000 API GraphQL, everything should have worked properly. Let's check. Okay, so the server is running. Now we can define our schemas, our queries, and our mutations. So if this is your first time using GraphQL, here we have two things. One is the resolvers and the other one is typedefs. So typedefs are basically a way to document your schema, your queries and mutations, and resolvers are actually the functions which you'll be using to create, read, update and delete. So let me first let's start off by creating the schema. So let's say type novel. So this should match what you mentioned here. Excuse me. Here in schema Prisma, this should match what you'll be defining here. This is basically a way to tell GraphQL how your tables will look like. So title will be a string, and this exclamatory here means this is basically non-nullable, and image will have an image which is a string. We'll have created at, which will be a string. We'll have an updated at, which will also be a string, and lastly we'll have an authors, which will give an array of author, so one-to-many relationship. Next, let's create a schema for author. So type author, id will be non-nullable, and we'll have a name, or it will be of string, and a novel id to point to this novel here. So novel id string. Next let us actually create a query. So let's say query novels should give me an array of novel. So if you're used to REST APIs, think of this as endpoints. So query would be something, say a get, and novels would be like um, the slash novels, the path. That is basically what we put inside. And there is also something called type mutation. So this would be in REST API terms something called as post or put. You would basically put in mutations and you would say add novel. That would be an endpoint and should give me an array, not an array, a single novel. So we'll get to this later. First let us actually see how to get this. Now in order to actually execute this, that is where these resolvers come in hand. So we have something called query to get the data, and we'll say novels, and the name of this should match what you've put here. So novels will give you an async, and you'll have three arguments, which is parent, args, and context. It should return, you'll await it, context dot prisma. So now I'm not getting any type definitions. So basically I'll talk about parents later. Args are basically whatever arguments you pass in here. So say I have an endpoint to get a single novel. This will give me a single novel. So this is how you would access one novel. You give it a ID and it should give me the respective novel. So whenever you're passing arguments here, in order to access these arguments, that is where these args come in. And context are basically anything which is shared across all your resolvers. So we'll actually start, we'll define a type definition for this. So type type context we'll actually export this, export type context Prisma, and the type definition will come from Prisma client, and this thing will pass here, context, and we'll also have to, we'll change this name to something more which makes more sense, Apollo server. Copy that, paste it here. We'll have a context to be an async function. We'll have a request, response, and rec response, and Prisma. Okay, so this Prisma basically comes from here. We'll have to import this. So for that, let's import it. IMP Prisma DB and Prisma. So now I don't think I have any errors, and we'll have to give the types for this. So in for all types of usage, I'll actually call this context. Okay, now I should get the TypeScript IntelliSense. Okay, I get it. So context is basically the shared instance across all your resolvers. So in this case it's Prisma. So all these resolvers will have a resolver for query and mutation will point to the same Prisma client. That is what context is. parent will do a little later. So context.prisma should point to novel table, and we should find many. Okay, and I'll save that. If I open my terminal, Prisma provides us with the GUI which is called npx Prisma Studio, so you can interact with your database using this line of code. So if I go to Prisma Studio, I can actually create a new record. So let me create one. I already have one here. That is like while I was testing it. So let's call it test2. I'll give it a random image now. Okay, then I click save. So it takes some time to load. So till it gets loaded, we'll go to authors and create an author. Add record to name testman2, and if I click this one, I can actually select the novel. So let me click the one which I just created here, then I'll save that. So once it's saved, here I have the table which I just created and the author which I created. This points to the one which I just created. So once that's done, now let's actually test this endpoint. So here in our Apollo server, I've clicked novels here. So if you've created here novels, it should come up here. So I click plus. I want the authors. I need the author's ID, name, novel ID. I go back, give me everything basically, and I execute this. So now I get everything here. So if you've noticed, authors is null, but I have two authors. I have one author in one novel. So in order to access that, we'll have to actually chain resolvers. So if you go to Apollo server docs, you'll actually find it here. So in order to actually reference these authors, you'll have to create another resolver to point to these authors. So let's do that now. So outside the query, you call the table, which is another table, the schema, which is novel, and you point to the authors here. This one, we mention the novel type and the authors, one of the fields of the novel, authors. Basically now we can copy this out and we'll paste it here. Okay, so everything here seems correct. Okay, so this time we don't want it to point to novel but author, the author table, and save it. Hit save, come back here, let's re-execute this, and we get all the authors now for this novel. So this basically works now. But no, actually we've made an error. If I go to Prisma Studio again, I'll actually just click this. I'll just show you what mistake I made. I'll refresh this. Okay. This 3. Yeah. So I've created, this is which one? This is, okay, this gets all the novels, fine. So this is one novel, and if I scroll down, so I'm getting authors. If I go back here, one novel should point out to one author, but here one novel is pointing out to two authors, which is not what we want. That is because we've given it a function find many, meaning in this author table, find everything, which we don't want. We want it to point out to the author in a given novel. So in order to do that, find many, we can give it a condition where novel ID, which is one of the fields in the author table, should be parent dot id. If I save this and if I execute this again, now there's only one here. So for a given novel, there's one author. So this parent is basically any arguments which you pass to the parent query can be accessed by the child resolver through the parent. So whatever ID which I'm getting from here, I can access with the parent. So with that, we've created our first endpoint. Now let us create an endpoint for getting individual novels. Here we are getting an array of novels. Now let us try to access an individual novel. So I go here. First I'll have to name the endpoint. So I'll call it novel and I'll give it parameter which will be an ID, which is not nullable, and it should return me a novel, single novel. Now to execute this again, we'll have to create a resolver for that. So under query, you go down, I'll copy this out and I'll paste it here. I'll call it novel. This time I don't want everything, but I just want one. So there's a function for it which is find unique. We'll have to provide a condition where to access this ID we'll have to use this argument here. So where ID is equal to args dot ID. So now if I go back to Apollo server, there are two queries here. I'll select one. So I'll have to provide it a parameter. First I'll also mention I want everything here. So this, in order to put a data here, if you scroll down, come here, you can see you have all this necessary thing. Don't want that. So we'll call this novel ID. Let's just take a random one. Say ID of 1 will be 1, and I execute that. Now I'm getting individual novels. Let me try to get the second one. I'm getting the second one now. You could also conversely, you don't have to actually put it here. While using Apollo server, you could delete it here, just call it some query name, just pass it directly here. So 1 should still work. Yeah, it's still working. So with that, we've created an endpoint to get one value. Now let's try mutations. So in order to create a mutation, what you would do is create a type called mutation, and let's add a novel. This is the endpoint which will be creating, add novel. It will receive two parameters. One is an image, which should be a string, a title, which will also be a string, and it should return a novel. Let's save that. Now we'll have to create a mutation for that. So if I scroll down, actually, I'll close all this. If I scroll down, this is query, this is a novel. I'll make a mutation one. So I'll call it mutation. I'll call it add novel. Again, this name should be same as the one which you mentioned here, add novel. And I'll copy this out. It's still here. Okay. And I paste it here. Now while adding a novel, all of this remains the same. We'll have to point to the novel table, and instead of find unique, it will be create. These are all basically Prisma functions which you can find in their docs. They have a bunch of them for creating, for updating, for finding unique ones. If I go to Prisma read, let's see, CRUD. So if you go here, you can find a bunch of them. They've detailedly mentioned everything. So let me start creating it now. So create would be instead of where, it would be data, I believe. Yeah, data, and I'll pass in the title. The title I can access through my args.title, and image will be args.image, and I save that. Now let us try it here. If I go back again, now I have mutations also. I'll click mutation, add novel. I have to give it two parameters, image, title, and these are basically what you want to be returned. So I'll just select everything here, and these variables can be given here. So we don't need novel ID. We'll give it an image. Just call it pic.href, and the title will be test3. I hit mutations, and basically creates us the novel. If I go back to Prisma Studio and I go to novel, I'll refresh this. It should come up here now. Yeah, it's here, and it generated a UUID for us. Okay, so we've created a mutation for adding a novel. Now let us make a mutation for updating a novel. Update novel. So we'll have to again give it some parameters, an ID to point towards the novel, a title which will be a string, an image which will also be a string, and it will return a single novel. I'll save that. Again, go to mutations. I'll copy this out. I'll paste it here and change the name to update novel. Update novel. And instead of create, I'll give a function called update. So this will have a where object where I give it an ID. So args.id, comma, and you'll also have to give it a data to replace the values. So title will be from args.title, and name will be args.name. Okay, I'm getting an error because, let me see. Okay, it's, let me go back here. Okay, it's an image, not a name. This should be image. Save that. If I go back here, am I getting an error again? Okay, I'm getting an error. Let me see what I made a typo somewhere. Just mention I have a capital T here. Let me save that. Now let me clear all this. Click mutation, update novel. We'll have to provide it with an ID, with a title and an image. Again, we'll get everything. So all of this we can actually, I won't give it here. I'll call it here itself, G. And the title will be, we'll take this one. ID is this. I paste in this. We'll give a title. So this was called test 3. I'll call it updated test, and an image here, ABC, and I execute this. So again, this works. Updated novel. Now let us create an endpoint for deleting a novel. So again, it's the same. Under mutations, delete novel. We'll have to give it just a single parameter, which is an ID. Should be ID non-nullable, and should return me a single novel. Save that. Save that, and I'll go to my resolvers. I'll clear this. Go to mutation, and under copy this and paste it here, and I'll call it delete novel, and this will be delete. Instead of all this, it will be where ID will be args.id, and I save that. Again, go back here, we'll check whether it's working. Create delete novel. I'll pass it here only. So we'll delete this. We'll just copy this. Copy, paste, a quote, and I'll just return these 3. Okay, status 200. This also works. Now let us create an endpoint for adding an author in this. So if I go back here, go to queries, I get all the novels. Just give me the image, authors, the name is. Okay, now let us create a endpoint for adding an author here. So let us add another author for, this is called title test 2. Fine. So go to mutations and add author. Parameters will be novel ID to point towards the novel which we want to add it to. ID, it should be non-nullable, and the name of the author. String, it should give me an author. Now let's go to our resolvers, mutation, copy this, paste it here, and instead of delete novel, I call it the same which I mentioned above, add author, and instead of novel it will be author, and instead of delete it will be create, where we don't need a where. Data, mention a novel ID, args dot novel ID, and the name will be args dot name. Let's check that. Mutations, add author to give in a novel ID. So this one, oops, I can't copy. For some reason I can't copy. Let me go back to Prisma Studio. I'll copy this out. Copy this out, paste it here. It should be in double quotes with the name, novel ID, and ID. You don't need this. Hit enter. Okay, something went wrong. I have to pass in another thing. Okay, I'll also have to pass another parameter, which is the name. If I go, I've passed in 2, so another one. Name will be, let's say, Fred. Executed, and it created a new author for us. If I go here, crashed. It created a new one, Fred, and the novel ID as well. It linked it to the novel ID. Okay, so we've added an author. Now the last one would be to delete an author. So let's delete an author. And we basically need just the ID. Should be non-nullable and should return an author. So let us create a function for deleting it. Copy, paste, and change it to delete author. And author, here it will be delete, and change this to where ID is args dot ID. Save that. I broke something, which is very common. Let me go down. There's some syntax error. Let's see. On top, let's see. Okay, I've put in 2 colons here. Should be just 1. Now if I go back here, okay. If I go back, mutation should be a delete author. I delete this author which I just created. Copy that, paste it here, and I'll return the name, novel ID. Delete this also. Now I execute it. As you can see here, it's making all the SQL. It's giving me the code. Prisma is making all the queries, and this got deleted. So with that, I guess we've created all the endpoints which you'll be needing for the client side. Okay, I think that's it. So as you can see here, everything is messy. Everything is in one big file. It's a huge mess. So just to clean things up, we'll go to app. No, actually, let's create a folder in the root directory called GraphQL, and inside the GraphQL let's create a new file called Typedefs, or let's call it schema. Schema would make more sense. Schema.ts, and I'll take all this out, cut, paste it here, and also export it. Save that. Then I'll create another file called resolvers.ts and copy all this, cut it out, paste it here, and export it. Okay, we'll also have to import this. Okay, so everything is fine now. Now here I'll import those resolvers. It should be from .GraphQL under schema. I need typedefs. Again the same, but this time be resolvers. I want resolvers. So with that, everything looks much better. So in the next video we'll implement the client side. We'll be using Apollo client to actually make a connection to the server and get the data. So in the last video we configured our Apollo server and we defined the schemas all here under GraphQL folder, the schemas, resolvers, and we also set it up. So now in this video what we'll do is we'll configure our Apollo client and fetch the data from the database. So I've got this app running. I've cleared all that initial code here, and I've also set up Tailwind CSS. So let's start then. So in order to begin, open your terminal and head over to Apollo client docs, not the server this time. If I scroll on top, we'll have to copy this line of code and install the dependencies, which is Apollo client and GraphQL. Then scroll down. We'll have to set it up. So in order to set up Apollo client in Next.js 13, what you'll have to do is you have to create a folder called components, then components, and inside the components we'll have a file called providers.tsx, RAFC. Now all our providers go in this file. So here what I'll do is I'll import this, I'll put it here, then I'll copy out these two lines and I'll paste it here. After that we'll have to give it the Apollo providers. So instead of this I'll give Apollo provider. Let me correct all this. Actually, let me go down, hit enter, Apollo provider, put this here, and I'll remove this. I'll also remove this, give a bracket. Okay, and I'll have to give it a client here, client. So instead of providers, we'll have to pass in children. So here I'll say children, and I'll give the type definition also, children react dot react node. Okay. Then here I'll take this out and put the children here, curly bracket. So with that, our provider is set up. Now head over to apps, go to layouts, and here under body we will give it the providers, and then give it here. So with that, we've set up Apollo client. We go back here, refresh. Okay, I'll have to run the server, and I refresh it. Let me see whether I'm getting any errors. Okay, this is because here you'll have to explicitly mention that it should not be used as a server component. So use client. This is a Next.js 13 thing, and if I refresh this, everything works. Now let us create a component called novels.tsx, and I'll give it the initial boilerplate code, and I'll go back to page, and here I'll give it the novel, the component which we just created. I save that, I refresh this, I'm getting the component here. So then now let us actually get the data from Apollo server. So before that, let us go to localhost 3000 API GraphQL. So let us actually get we'll use novels query, and we'll get everything here. I'll get the ID, image, title, updated at, and I'll execute this function. As you can see here, Prisma is making all the queries for us. So we are getting now all the novels which are there in the database. So in order to actually execute this from the client side, what we'll do is under GraphQL folder, let's create a file called let's say queries.ps, and here let us import from @apollo client, will import GQL. So this is basically to execute the queries. Apollo client uses something called GQL. So I'll create that query now, export const, and by convention we have to capitalize everything. So get novels, and then I give GQL backticks, and I can just copy this out as this is the query. So copy this out, paste it here, and save it. Next, what we'll do is let's head over back to novels, and here let us destructure data from use query hook which Apollo client gives us, and then we'll have to give it the query which we just created, which is get novels. I save that, and let's see whether it works. I'll console log out the data, save it, go back here. Okay, so this is basically because this also should be Since we are using hooks here, this also should be a client component. So if I open my DevTools and I go to consoles, okay, I'm getting undefined. Let's see why that is. Const data, I'm console logging out the data. Get novels. Let's go back to queries, see what we did wrong here. Export const query. If I go back here, this query works properly. Okay, so export get novels, use query. Strange. Let's see. Let's get dot novels from it. Let's see what we get. Save that. Oops. Let me check what it is. Data is undefined. Okay, this if I put question mark, it should fix it. Still getting undefined. Course origin error. Okay, I get what the mistake is. Let's go back to providers. This actually should be the URI for our this endpoint, pages /API /GraphQL. So instead of this, I'll take http://localhost 3000 /API /GraphQL. Okay, I think that's enough. I'll save that again and see what I get. Okay, so this time I'm getting the object which I want, arrays, and I'm getting all the data from it. So let me head over back to novels. So this basically is working. Now let us actually save this. We get two other things from useQuery, which is loading and error. So if I come down here and say if loading is true, return p loading, and if there is an error, I would say something as return p, oops, something went wrong. I save that, and if I refresh this, you can see here when the data is loading, we get a message loading, and if there was an error, this message would have popped out. Next, what we'll do is we'll create a type definition for the novels data which we'll be getting. So let's say const novels is equal to data will be optional novels, and let's create a type definition for this. So let's call it let's say iNovel, since it will be an interface, it will be an array of this. So let us create this. To our root directory, let's create a typings dot d dot ts, and let's create that interface iNovel extends novel, authors will be from author array. I save that, and okay, so this basically means okay, I'll have to import that. So I can using Prisma, when we're using Prisma, we can actually use this as a type definition. So in order to do that, we could just import it from at Prisma client. We can import those models, author and novel, and I save that. So this basically means now all the attributes of novel, um, I extend it to iNovel, and I add another field called authors. I want an authors of array of author, which is a model here, model. So that's a good thing about Prisma. You don't have to create a type definition over and over again. I'm doing this because when we are accessing the like the if you want the type definition of this, as you can see here, it doesn't provide us with the array of objects for authors. So that's why I'm doing this additional coding here. So I'll close that. I think I'll have to import that. Let me see. Add typings. So I've basically gotten that now. So now let me create the UI for it. So I'll just paste it out here because I don't want to waste too much time there. So I've written all the Tailwind CSS code here, as you can see. If you in the future videos, if you want me to actually type the Tailwind CSS codes live, I could do that, no problem. But as this video is just to show you how Apollo client works, I skipped that portion. So I've styled the body of the form here, and I've also added a header component here, and I've put it inside the body, the header, so that the header is available in all the pages. So once that's done, let's actually create a mutation for adding a novel. So for that, let us go to Apollo server again, and if I expand this a bit and I go back, I uncheck this, I go back again, uncheck that mutation. Let's add a novel now. We'll need an image, we'll need a title, we'll need an author, we'll get back the authors, and we'll also get all the other fields as well. So now we can just copy this. We can head back over to Next.js. Under GraphQL folder, let's create a new file called mutations. So this is basically just to structure everything out properly. If I would put this query add novel over here, it would be even more messier. So just for it to be easier for people to look to the code, I've structured it this way. GQL, I'll import GQL from at Apollo client. Now let us export const, let's call it add novel, again all in caps because we'll follow the standards, and I'll just paste it here. If I here, I'll save this now, and I'll head back over to novel, and now let us use that mutation. So in order to do that, what you'll do is let's put this here. Actually, I'll put this here. Now it looks better. Const add novel, this is just the name. I'll get this from use mutation, and I could just add, I could put the query which I just created in here inside this, and I'll save that. Now I've created a handle submit for, like, if I go back here, I'm using title for tracking what the users put in this input, and image the URL of the image in this input. So I'm tracking that here. I've also created a handle submit, and if it is empty, there will be an alert of saying enter fields. So now, in order to execute this mutation, what you would do is you would just come here, call that function, function which you just created, and inside that we'll have to give it two variables, which is variables, because as you can see here, this takes in two variables. So in order to actually give this query its variables, you'll come here and just type image and title, and you can save that. You could also come here and do the same if you're using variables. So I come here, variables, and I give it an object, image and title. I save that. Now let us try whether it works or not. Actually, looping over that. Okay. Anyway, let's just check whether it's working. Network reload. I'll just say it's still loading. Okay. So now let me just say test title and test URL. I add the novel. I should get okay, so we made an error. Let's see what that is. Prisma no invocation where ID string test. Args are listed in green. Okay, let me see what the mistake was. I go to mutations. This image title. Okay, let me go to queries. Not here, schema. Add novel should have image and a title. Should return 1. If I go to resolvers, if I go under mutation, add novel, it has a okay, I think there's an error here. Mutation, add novel. Okay, this should be, instead of, we've actually misspell this. This should be add novel and this should be update novel. Okay, so I'll just yes, I'll use create here, and I'll just replace this. No, I'll take this out. I'll put it here and make this update, and I'll click enter, paste this here. Oops. Okay, anyways, let me where id is equal to, not is equal to, set it to ask id, and I give a comma here. So that fixes it. Add null, update null. Okay, let me close that, check again, let me refresh this. Let me, what is this? Okay, anyway, never mind this. Let me clear everything, reload everything. Okay, let's test title, test URL, and I hit add null. Let me see. Okay, the variables which we sent was test URL, test title, and the response is the object which we are getting. So a new object was created. So this works now. Now let us let's see what we'll do next. We'll loop, no, we'll actually get the data here now. So in order to do that, once again, let us go here. I've commented this out already, and create a new component called novel to get the individual novel. So new file, novel.tsx irafc to get the initial boilerplate code. Save it. I'll have to import this. I'll also have to give it a type definition, the props which should be coming. This novel should be a type I novel. I'll destructure novel here, and I'll give it the props. Save that. I save this. Now it comes up here. So now let me paste the, let me see what we're doing here. Okay, let me paste the styling for it here. Typed in all the styling for this, and basically here we are not getting an image because we didn't provide a valid the image URL. So if I go back here and I open npx Prisma studio, hit enter, and go here to novel. It takes some time to load usually. Okay, as you can see here, I've not given it a proper URL. That's why here there's nothing coming up. So let's check again. Let's try posting another data now. Let's say test 5, and let me give a random. No, actually what we'll do is we'll say, we'll go to Google, we'll take dopamine. It's not a novel, but it gets the job done. I'll take the URL of this, copy image link. I'll go back here, say dopamine, and I paste the URL here, add novel. If I refresh the page, I should be getting that new novel which I created, yeah, down here. So as you can see here, it's not immediate. As soon as I add a data, it doesn't reflect here. So for that to work, what we'll do is, if we go back to where we are making the query, where we are adding the novel, so use mutation has another field called refetch queries. So let me type it out, refetch queries, and this will, I want to get back all the novels. Get novels, no, it was query. Get novels. So this basically means that whenever we are adding a mutation, it has to refresh the queries which we've mentioned here. So get novels. So get all the novels. Once I add a new data, get me all the novels. Make a new query again. So let's test that out again. So let me go this time to say Harry Potter. Let's take this one. I copy the image link. I go to create next app. I say Harry Potter, and I give the image URL, and I hit add novel. Now it should come up here. Yeah, it's come up here. So that is working. Next, let's create a mutation for deleting the novel, since it's we don't want all this. So let's go back to mutations, and to make a delete novel, let's copy this out and I paste it here. I rename this to delete novel GQL, and this should change. So let's head back over to Apollo server, go back. Instead of add novel, we'll use delete novel, and we'll get everything back again. So usually what you would do is you would only get back the data which is relevant to you, but since this is for demonstration purpose, I'm getting everything. So I'll copy this out and I paste it out here. And again, this should match the ski what you've mentioned here. Delete novel, this should be matching. Delete novel, delete novel. I've done, while I was building this application before, I've gotten that error. That's what I'm saying. Okay, so once that's done, let's go back to novel. Okay, close that, close this. As you can see here, I've made a button here, on click. Let's create a mutation for it now. So let's go here, const delete novel, use mutation, and let me say the one which we just created. So delete novel, I'll say it to refresh the queries, and refresh the query, get me all the novels. I think we imported that. Okay, so if I go back down, I uncomment this out, delete novel. It takes in variables, which is, if I go back to mutations, takes in a variable called delete novel ID. So we'll have to feed it that. So variables id is equal to id is equal to novel id, the id which you want to delete, the id of that. So that we are getting from, if I go back to novels, we are looping through this object, and each object has an id. So when we are feeding it to this component, the id is stored in this object. So I'm accessing that over here, novel.id. So if I save that, go back here, I delete this. Okay, I got an error. Let me check what that is. Okay, so let's head back over to novel, and I think we made a mistake here somewhere. So here, if I see its id, if I go back to mutations, novel. Okay, yeah. So this mistake is basically in the variables for mutation. I'm saying there is an object, the key is id and the value is novel id, but in the mutations I've defined the key as delete novel id, so there's a mismatch. So I think in order to correct this, if I just copy id and I mention it here and I save that and I refresh this just in case, and I scroll and I delete one, so it might take some time to delete. Okay, so that now works. So the mistake was there was a mismatch between the variables. And you could, as you can see here, I've given the variables here. You could also put it here. You could make a new object calling it variable here also. Either way works fine. I'm just choosing to use it this way so that I can demonstrate it to you. So now that our read, create, delete is over, next let us actually um, create a let's let's create a link for actually going to this page. So as you can see here, I have a link here, href, which goes to the base URL which I've created here, which is basically localhost 3000, whichever you're deploying. um, Base URL slash novels slash novel ID. So in order to create this page, what you would do is, under app, you would create a folder, not a file, create a folder called novel, and novel should have an ID. This you could basically name it whatever you want. I'm just choosing to call it ID, and inside this there will be a file called page.tsx rafce for the snippet. I will call this novel, and I save this. Now if I go and click read more, okay, I'll go and click read more. It is navigating me to this page, novel, and the ID which we are passing. So in order to access this params for in Next.js 13, what you would do is, you would just go here and call it params, and for now I'll just name it any. I'll console log this params dot id. I save that. So as you can see, I'm getting the ID now. So this will make a couple of changes. This will be a client side, so use client, and inside the props will have params. Inside that there's an ID called string. We could actually directly destructure ID, so I'll do that. ID, and this will be from props. And if I console log this out and save this, open my DevTools, I'm getting the ID here. So we've successfully gotten the ID from the URL. Next, what we'll do is we'll get the individual novel. So for that, we'll go back to queries and the GraphQL folder. We'll copy this out. We'll paste it here. We'll call it get novel, and let's head back over to Apollo server. Go back, uncheck mutation, query, novel. I'll get back everything, including the authors. I'll copy this out and I'll paste it here. Also rename this to ID, and I save it. Now let us use query and get that. So for that, const data use query, and if I give is called get novel, I have to import this. I save that. I console log out the data, and if we go back here, refresh it, undefined. That is because, okay, you'll also have to give it variables, because as you can see here, if I go to queries, it needs a variable ID for accessing the individual novel. So here we go back, variable, and we give it the ID. That way, let me, okay, so I'm getting it. So I got the individual novel now. That's great. Now let me actually paste out the stylings for this. So as you can see here, I've pasted out the stylings. So I have 3 inputs, each of which I'm tracking its value with the with three states, which is name for author name, title and URL. Title and URL for the updating the title of the novel and the picture as well. So if I scroll down, let's go with the updating the novel next. So these two inputs is tracked here. It's under form inputs with the value title and value URL. So for updating the picture and the title, let's go again to mutations. We'll copy this out, we'll paste this, and then instead of delete novel, we'll call it update novel. Update novel. And this will have, okay, let's go back to Apollo server, go back to cut all that, mutations, update novel. It'll have ID, title, image, and I want everything again. Just click everything here. I'll copy this out, I'll paste it out here, and I'll rename some of the values. This will be ID, this will be title, that's fine, image also is fine. Okay, so with this, our query for updating the novel, our mutation for updating the novel is done. Now let us create a function for it. So handle update novel, go on top, let's create that function now, and update novel. Okay, give them event, so form event dot Prisma dot HTML form element e dot prevent default. And we'll also, if there is no name, the name is empty, or if title is empty, or the URL is empty, I want to exit the function. Actually, I'll give a alert message. So alert saying please enter novel, or please enter fields. That's better. This is a validation. Now let us actually call this mutation update novel. So let me, don't need all this. Okay, let's create it here. Const update novel, and we'll say use mutation. I've called it update novel. It takes in a few variables. ID will be ID, and title and image will be URL. I'll also refetch the queries. So if I make changes, I want it to reflect in the UI, so that's why I'll do this. Refetch queries, query, I'll get novel, and I also have to pass in the variables, which is the ID. Okay, now I'll call this here. So update novel, I'll give the variables variables is id is id. You actually don't need to do this, but I'll do it just in case because I've already mentioned it above. So image URL, and also set the title to empty string and set the URL to empty string. Save that, go back to next step. I'll cut all this up. Let me copy lose travel novel and take a link of it. So this one, copy image link. So let's call it Gulliver's Travel and give the URL and update it. Let's see whether it works. Open my, okay, so it's working. So we've successfully added the update functionality. Now let's do for the authors. So if I come down here, I've made a AI minus button. This is for deleting. Let's create one for adding an author. So here, so I'm tracking the name of the author with the state name, and I'll have to create a function now. So let's create it. I'll create it right here. Const. I'll copy all this. It's fine. So this time, if name is empty, return alert, please enter author name, and instead of this we'll have to create a new mutation for that. So set name to null. Let's make a mutation for adding author name. So save that. Let's go here and let's create it here. So I'll copy this out, paste it here, call it add author. GQL mutation will go back to Apollo server. Cut that out. Add author, name, ID, name, no ID. I'll copy this. And I'll paste it right here. This will be novel ID and name. Okay, that's fine. Let's go back here and let's call that now. So let's create it right. Okay, let's create it here. Add author. Again, use mutation. Call that mutation which we just made, add author. And this time we'll actually need some variables. Variables which will be the novel ID, and also name. Since the key and value have the same value with the same name, I've basically just put here name. Then let us refetch the queries as well. Refetch query. We'll get which one? It's a get novel, and we'll also have to give it some variables, which is an ID, and we'll call it here now. add author variables novel id and as well as the name. I'll say that here. Let's check whether it's working. Let's say John. I mean no disrespect. Okay, why am I getting that error? Let's see. Add author. Okay, so we don't need this part. It's fine. It should come up here. Yeah, now I'm getting John. That is because I'm looping over the authors right here. Novel.authors map. I'm mapping through it. Now let's create a functionality for actually deleting an author. So for that, again, let's go back to mutations, copy this out, paste it here. I'll change the name to delete author, and let's go to Apollo server, go back and delete author. Just get everything, copy this out, paste it here, and instead of author ID, I'll just call it ID. Save it here, go to page. I've already made that function, delete author. We'll have to create that mutation. So let's create it right here. Delete author. I'm just going to use mutation. Feed it the mutation, which is delete author, and takes in some variables. Actually, we'll give it the variables directly in the JSX here. So for now, refetch queries. I'll say why that is shortly. Refetch queries, get me back, get novel, and the variables will be ID, and I say that. So I'm not giving it the variables here is because I simply don't have access to it here, because that comes in an array of authors. It comes in an array of authors, and I cannot access individual author here. So what I'm doing is, if I go here, each novel has an authors, and in each authors I'm mapping through individual author. So then I have access to each ID. So what I do is, in the mutation here itself, I can say that the variables is ID author.id. I couldn't do that here because it is an array of authors. Here now it's a single author. So that is why I'm doing it this way. So if I go back here, let's add test, add another one, wait for it, and if I click negative button, it should go. Yeah, it's gone. So with that, we've completed all of the functionalities of our application. So just to test everything out, go back here. I'll actually delete this. I'll delete this as well. Okay, I'll add a new novel. Say I'll take this one, copy image link. Right here, I'll paste it here. I'll call it labels 2. I add the novel. I'll wait for it for the queries to execute, and I've gotten it here. Then I can also delete it. Let me delete this. This has one author. I'll delete this one. It's making the queries here. That's gone. I can click read more. I can see what the info is. I can add new authors. John, again, no disrespect. I can add John 2, add John 3, add. If I go back, there are 3 authors. Here there's only 1 author. Okay, I can delete authors. John 2, if I go back, 2 authors. And I can also change the URL and the title. So copy image link, come here, paste it here, and deliver. Update. Again, it's making the queries for me. Everything executes. So hopefully this video is helpful to you guys. I'll link the code for this down in the description below. Thanks for watching.